There are two things I'd like to speak about tonight, about the Parsha, and I thought that they were two unrelated things until literally minutes ago, as I was sitting in the car, it dawned on me that the two are very, very deeply intertwined. The first is a very, very serious philosophical question. We know that God sent 10 plagues to the Egyptians. And these plagues were really, seems from the Chumash, for the sake of Paro. And here, in the commentators, we have different opinions. The Rambam understands it was to punish Paro. The Ramban understands it was to enlighten Paro. But it was for Paro. This was a demonstration for Paro's benefit. But who was really afflicted in the Machas? It wasn't just Paro. But thousands and thousands and thousands of seemingly innocent and powerless Egyptians also suffered in the plagues. Blood, frogs, lice, etc. And it's hard to understand what did they deserve that? Now, one might have said that they also were guilty of enslaving the Jews. But this really depends on a machlokas, a dispute, in the commentators in Parsha SHMOT several weeks back. The Ramban understands from the verses that there were two stages of the enslavement. The initial stage, the first stage, was the Jews were enslaved to the regime. They were slaves of the government. And later, Paro gave a license for Egyptians to take Jews as private slaves. So ultimately, all the Egyptians had Jewish slaves. But the Ramban says that Chazal don't understand it this way. He brings a medrash which says that the Jews never were slaves to private Egyptians. They were always slaves to the government. And in fact, anyone who's participated in a Pesach Seder knows that. We say, Avodim hayinu lefaro b'Mitzrayim. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. It's clear, we were slaves to Pharaoh. We weren't slaves to private Egyptians. We were slaves of the regime. So the question comes back in full force. So why should the innocent countrymen be afflicted in the plagues? This is one question. Another question that I want to talk about tonight is the idea that we have the mitzvah of relating the story of the Exodus to our sons, to our children, in this week's Parsha. Now we know the Torah talks about this in 4 places. There are 4 different places where the Torah speaks about this, and also we know from the Haggadah that the reason that the Torah discusses this in 4 places is because there are 4 types of sons. There is the wise son, and the wicked son, and the simple son, and the son who's too immature to ask. And each has to be given a different type of explanation, so therefore the Torah discusses this in 4 places. 3 of the 4 places are in this week's Parsha. The 4th, the section which deals with the wise son, is in the book of Dvarim and Parsha of Shemos. But 3 of the 4 are in our Parsha, so that's a very worthy topic. So at first glance, these two have very little to do with each other. So let's take them up separately, and then in the end, perhaps we'll understand very deeply how these two are very, very much intertwined. Let's start with the second issue first, the mitzvah of fathers teaching their children about the Exodus. Now, the truth is that the obligation, generally, of teaching Torah is a mitzvah which the Torah places upon parents. You shall teach your children to speak the words of Torah. The mitzvah of teaching Torah is a mitzvah which the Torah imposes upon parents to instruct their children. There's no school system which is mandated in the biblical command. So what changed? What changed? Why is it we send our kids to school? So this was an ordinance that was made in early Talmudic times. The Talmud says there was a great sage, Rabbi Eliezer in Gamla, who said that the system of parents teaching their children doesn't seem to be working out. Why? First of all, there are many children who don't have parents. And there are many children whose parents aren't able to teach them. Maybe the parents themselves aren't learning. Maybe the parents have no time. They work very hard. There could be other scenarios which the Gemara doesn't mention. Imagine you have a family where you have children that are a range of ages. You have a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old and a 11-year-old and a 15-year-old and a 20-year-old, which is possible. You obviously can't put them together in one class. So if the father would have to teach each of these children, it will be very difficult. You have to give each one of them a separate class every day. How could one father do that? So therefore, organizing schools makes sense. The Talmud says that this great sage, Rabbi Shimon Gamla, instituted a system of free religious education, and the Talmud says that we should remember him because if not for him, Torah would have certainly been forgotten from the Jewish people. But the question is that if the fathers teaching their children is not the ideal, it's so impractical, why does the Torah put it that way? Because it seems that the Torah is coming to tell us that in some way, in some sense, there is an ideal that it should be fathers that teach their children, or parents, I should say, teach their children. It's not practical, it won't work out, so therefore we have to have schools. But there's a price we pay. It's not that schools are in every way better than homeschooling. There's something to be said for parents teaching their children. Unfortunately, it's not practical, so we have to have schools. So let's try to understand what is that element that is special about parents teaching their children. But what we also have to point out is that there's one day a year that parents do not abdicate their responsibility, and of course that's the night of the Seder. There's a Rishub Gamliel ordained that there should be schools, but he didn't ordain that on the Seder night, instead of having a family Seder, you should have a communal Seder, and teachers should instruct the children as to the Exodus. Whereas here, the mitzvah was left intact. Not fulfilled through an agent, rather it is the father who discharges the responsibility, and thank God, this has been for eternity. So the question is this, so why is it so important? You might say, well, it's only one night a year, it's a lot easier than teaching Torah, which is a daily responsibility. So okay, so the rest of the year we have to have schools, but one night a year we can expect the parents to do it. Maybe there's something deeper. Maybe there's a special reason that this mitzvah was left intact, and somehow the advantage that fathers have, the rest of the year we are willing to sacrifice, but somehow when it comes to the Seder night, it's imperative that we not sacrifice that. There's a Ramban in Parsha V'Eschanan. This is a very, very important thing. We know that we believe the Torah is divine, composed by God, given to us through the agency of Moshe Rabbeinu. How do we know that? What is our proof? How do we really know that the Torah is divine, that it's written by God, that it was given to Moshe Rabbeinu? Maybe it's just a myth, maybe it's just a collection of legends. What is the basis of our conviction that the Torah is true? Now, the Rambam already gives the answer. The Rambam says that our eyes, the eyes of the Jewish people, witnessed the revelation. That when the Jews stood at Mount Sinai, they saw with their own eyes, they heard with their own ears, God speaking to Moshe Rabbeinu. They were witnesses to this. Or they saw it as clearly as we see cars in the street, buildings, all the things that we take for granted because our senses tell us that they exist. To those people who were there at Mount Sinai, the fact that Moshe had direct communication from God is something that we saw ourselves. But that only answers half the question. That is the basis of the conviction of that generation. But how do we know? Whereas we have a tradition that's been passed down in a chain. How do we know that that chain is accurate? That the Masorah, the chain of tradition, has not become corrupted? The Ramban says a very surprising answer. The Ramban says that the basis of this conviction is a presumption that parents do not lie to their children. Parents do not lie to their children. Now, when I repeat this Ramban, I always add an extra clause that parents do not lie to their children on matters of consequence. Whereas white lies, parents will tell their children, like, we're not going out. Go to bed. Don't worry, we're staying home. Those types of stories we do tell. But on matters of fundamental importance, parents will not lie to their children. This is what Ramban says. This is the basis. And it's very interesting that if you study the history of Jewish literature, until, I guess you would say, the 1800s, you do not find Jewish fiction. You find every other type of genre. You have poetry, you have prose, you have dramatic works, dramatizations of true stories, of biblical stories. You have, even the Ramchal, the famous Ramchal, wrote plays about biblical characters. The story of Shemos he dramatized, and so on and so forth. It's an amazing thing. But you don't find fiction. You don't find fiction. You find a little bit, sometimes you find mishalim. You find parables which are meant to bring out a point. So therefore, to concretize the point, we express it in terms of an allegory, in terms of a story. But fiction, a novel with plot and characters and unfolding scenes, you don't have that until the 1800s. There is no early Jewish fiction. And the reason for that is very simple. You see, adults have a very easy time separating fact from fiction. Whereas we can read a novel and we understand that's in our imagination world, and read the newspaper, that's in our real world. But children have a very hard time differentiating. Whereas when it seems that our very young children are compromised in the matter of truth-telling, it's not that they're malicious. To them, it really is very, very blurry, the line that separates fact from fiction. And it's very important that the kids not be confused, because, again, they are relying on our guidance to know what is true and what is not true. So if we fill their heads with Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy, it becomes very, very, very hazy to them. Because where does fiction begin, and where does fact begin? So therefore there was a commitment to truthfulness, to not telling Baba Nisus, not telling stories. Sister Ramban says that this is the basis of our conviction, that if we have a tradition, our parents told us that there was a Torah and God stood at Har Sinai and gave it to Moshe Rabbeinu, we know that's true. Where did our parents get it from? Their parents. Where did their parents get it from? Their parents. An unbroken chain going all the way back. But if this in fact would have been a fiction, the chain would have been broken. No reasonable parent would perpetuate a fiction that children should believe something which is false. This is what Ramban says. Now, it seems to me that we can make a distinction between two types of learning, keeping this Ramban in mind. There are things that we learn which, after we learn them, seem to be self-evident, or it's really obvious that it's so. It may be I never thought about it beforehand, but once I have been told it, I see that makes sense. So, for example, let's say I'm teaching multiplication facts to a child. So it may be the child never thought in terms of multiplication, but certainly once he learns the facts and thinks about them deeply, he'll see that, of course, it's true. 5 times 7 is 35. 7 times 7 is 49. And it's not something which the child has to accept just on the basis of authority. Once he's taught it, he can see for himself that it's so. He can take objects, manipulate them, and he can divide them into piles of 7, and he can count the 7 piles and then count all the units over again, and it'll come up to 49. In other words, these are things that, yes, he has taught them, but they in turn can be confirmed and established as true. Then there are things that even after you're taught them, you really can't confirm them. They aren't self-evident. They can't be confirmed. It's just a matter of faith. And it would seem to me that it's particularly critical in those areas that you learn from a person you can trust. In other words, the type of learning where after you learn it, it becomes self-evident, or there's a lot of confirming evidence, that you can learn from anybody. Because even if you take it with a grain of salt, as you learn it, maybe the teacher is pulling my leg, but you can confirm it for yourself. You have evidence, you can prove it, maybe it's even self-evident. So therefore, you can learn from anybody. But let's say it's something which even after you learn it, you can't prove it. It's only something which is a matter of faith. So here you're relying on the authority of the person who taught you. Why should I accept that authority? If it's a parent who loves you, who cares for you, who would not deliberately mislead you, that's a pretty good reason to rely on it. There's a lot in Torah which, once you learn it, it makes perfect sense. The Torah says if you steal, you have to make restitution. That makes sense, right? If you steal, you should have to make restitution. The Torah says that there's a mitzvah to pray every day. The rabbis extended it 3 times a day, but the Torah says there's a mitzvah to pray once a day. Well, that makes sense. If there is a God in the world, we should pray to Him. So things like that you can learn from anybody. It doesn't have to be your father. It can be anybody. Maybe better learn from your father. After all, your father knows you well. He knows your talents. He knows your strengths. He knows your weaknesses. Perhaps the father would be a better teacher, a superior teacher. But these are things that you can learn really from anybody. But when it comes to the Ikrei Hadas, the fundamentals of faith, here you can't learn them from anybody. Because if I have to accept them as a matter of faith, even after I'm taught them, why should I accept them just because you told them to me? You being some relative stranger. If my father tells them to me, I know my father loves me, he cares for me, he would not want to deliberately mislead me, now I have a basis to believe it. The difference between what we learn Pesach night and we learn the entire year we learn the broad expanse of Torah. All the halachas, all the mitzvahs, all the rules, all the things that make perfect sense after you learn them. So, yes, it may be better to learn from your father, but, okay, it's impractical. Parents have to go to work. They can't direct their attention to all their children. Maybe they're orphans, don't have parents. So, okay, we'll have schools. There's a trade-off. Schools are efficient, and the children won't suffer immense harm because they'll learn what they learn, and it'll make sense to them, and they'll accept it. But what we learn Pesach night is faith. We learn Pesach night is faith. And we're going to see that there are elements of our faith that even after you learn them, it's not that, oh yeah, now it's axiomatic, it's self-evident truth. You have to accept it as a matter of faith. And you can't really prove it. Those are the types of things that you really want to hear from your parents. You want to hear from the people that experienced them and whose trust who can be trusted. Is that clear? The point? Now let's talk about one aspect of this faith. I think that goes back to this very difficult question. The question of the suffering of the Egyptian people. Now, I'm going to try to give you an answer. an explanation for this. And I think it's a real explanation. I think it's a valid explanation. But it's not an explanation which is so obvious that you say, oh, why didn't I think of that? That makes so much sense, it can't be otherwise. But on these matters, okay, that's an explanation. Maybe yes, maybe no. It's the kind of thing that you require faith to accept. Now, one of the reasons, by the way, that it comes to mind this week is because really this is the subject of the news. I'm sure you're following the news of the earthquake in Haiti. And we're talking about a catastrophe. I mean, I don't know if all the reports can be counted on, but one report I read today is that they think that it may be, after all is tallied, over 200,000 deaths, which seems just incredible. I mean, the estimates are going higher and higher and higher and higher. A few days ago they were saying 50,000. Now they're saying as many as 200,000. It's just incredible. 200,000, people, and they don't seem to be guilty of any crime. Probably very decent people. Children. How do we understand something like that? And what's unusually terrible in this instance is that in a large country, if part of the country is struck by an earthquake, you still have the infrastructure of the country to extend relief and to administer the country and so on and so forth. Here it's a tiny country, and the earthquake really hit very near the capital. Essentially, there's no Haiti anymore. I read somewhere, I remember one of the papers, someone made a point that it's the type of situation that makes you just want to deport the entire population somewhere else. And what's the use of rebuilding that country? It's a country which is, to say they're battered with storms and hurricanes and now an earthquake. Look, pick everyone up and move them somewhere else. Some more stable, more solid, less susceptible to natural disasters. It's a terrible thing. It's a terrible, terrible thing. How do you understand that? When you think about it for a second, it's the same question that we raised about the Makos and Mitzrayim. How do you understand natural disasters that seemingly don't discriminate? Rashi in Chumash says a very surprising thing. Rashi in Chumash says that God brings calamity on the nations of the world for the sake of the Jewish people to be able to learn valuable lessons. That seems a little strange. Whereas Jews need to learn a lesson. So therefore, the only way to teach this lesson is to have 200,000 people in Haiti die. It seems we could learn lessons differently. Now, someone asked me the question, do Jews really learn the lessons? After all said and done, are Jews talking about the earthquake, thinking about the earthquake? I told this lady, he says, let me just tell you one thing, that I don't think there's a synagogue in the country where the rabbi didn't speak about the earthquake. I did a very unscientific survey Saturday night. I was sitting next to a synagogue rabbi at a simcha. And I asked him, do you speak about the earthquake? He said, yes. So I figured, well, if he did, probably the other 100,000 also did. Admittedly, it's unscientific. But he did. So, the potential does exist for learning lessons. I'm not saying, by the way, that every rabbi's sermon necessarily drew the correct conclusion. It may be that some of the lessons are mistaken lessons, but the point is everyone's talking about it. But it's still, even if this would be a teaching moment, as President Obama would say, for hundreds of thousands of Jews, it still doesn't make any sense. How is it possible that we need to learn a lesson, so therefore there's immeasurable suffering? Let me share with you what I think the correct answer is to this question. And again, it's an answer which I think is an important answer, but it's not the type of answer that as soon as you hear it, you'll say, oh, of course, can't be otherwise. The Ramchal in the Sefer Derech Hashem and in his other books explains the idea that God created the world for a purpose. Why did he create? God created because since he is good, it is the nature of that which is good to bestow good. God wanted to bestow goodness, kindness on created beings. Now this itself is an idea that you have to very carefully examine. As we know, if a poor person would come our way, we certainly would want to help him. We would feel compassion, we would feel it's important to give the person a hand, whether with money, food, whatever the person needs. But we would not create needy people with our magic wands just for the sake of having objects for our benevolence. That hardly seems right. If a person happens to be in need, we'll respond to the need, but we should create needy beings so that we have the opportunity to be good to them. But we find this too. Because what is the impulse to have children? Because why do people want to have children? Now, there's nothing more helpless than a newborn child. But why do people want to have children? Bring these helpless beings into the world? Because this is the opportunity for us to shower them with our love, with our caring. And this, by the way, is the most creative thing that people can do. To create children. Certainly more creative than many of the activities we do. Painting by numbers. I mean, you are creating. You are actually bringing a new life into the world for nothing else than the yearning to shower love on a being that you created. God is the same way. Now, where does this happen? Where does this happen? This is the important thing. If someone tells you that it happens right here in Toronto, in Thornhill, on Clark Avenue, is making a big mistake. This is the experience of the world to come. It's not this world. This is the experience of the world to come. The experience of the world to come is the bliss of dveikus, the bliss of cleaving to the divine presence. Now, did that sound exciting? What greater joy could there be than cleaving to the divine presence? Doesn't it excite you? Again, these are deep concepts, but let me see if I can illustrate it. Let's say you had a friend who accomplished great things. You know, they produced great works of literature, works of art, ran for public office, won, and you're very pleased about his successes. And he comes to you and says, "Now I want you to know that I couldn't have done that if not for you. All my successes in life are thanks to you. Your encouragement, your friendship, your guidance. It's all to you." So would that give you satisfaction? Sure. Right? Just think, your input enabled this person to achieve so much. Okay, so there you share in his achievements because of your involvement. There's a causation. You're the cause of his successes. Let me give you another example. Let's say your spouse does something great. He or she achieves something, gets a PhD, is very successful in his or her career, and so on and so forth. Does that give you satisfaction? Sure. Now, what if you could argue that your spouse could have done better without you? Well, I mean, I don't mean to be facetious, but let's say you can't take the credit because you caused it. Because why do you take the credit? Here it's slightly different. Here it's because, in as much as you are one, that you have a relationship. So you have satisfaction in your spouse's achievements in the same way that you have satisfaction with your own achievements, even though really you might not be the cause of those achievements. You know, it reminds me of a story. There was a great rabbi whose name I will not mention because the story is a little embarrassing. And he was married to a very contentious woman. She really gave him a hard time. And she gave him no peace. He couldn't study. He couldn't, minister to his congregation. It really was bad news. So he decided that there's no choice but to get a divorce. So, Jewish divorce is effected through a get, written bill of divorce, but the woman has to voluntarily accept it. So she refused to accept the get. So he's really stuck. What can he do? So he had an acquaintance who was a great Talmud Chacham, Rabbi Eliezer. You may have heard of Rabbi Eliezer. And Rabbi Eliezer once came to visit him, and he poured out his soul for Rabbi Eliezer and said, maybe you convince my wife to accept the get. Because she's making my life miserable. I can't do anything. So okay, I'll try. So Ray went and spoke to her, tried to explain to her. And finally says that perhaps you should consider accepting a get. And she said, what? I should give up the schus, the merit of being married to such a Torah scholar? Sharing in his achievements, in his excellence. I wouldn't give it up for any price. The truth is, and maybe there's something, maybe she convinced herself that she was really the great woman behind the man, but in fact it was the opposite. But to the extent that there is a connection, there's a relationship, there's also tremendous, the successes of the one somehow attach themselves to the other. The experience of Olam Haba is we cleave to God. And therefore, imagine how satisfying it would be to be God. You're pretty good. Imagine if you could be God. You would have the perfection of God. You would have the power of God, the omnipotence of God. Through your cleaving to God, you partake of that. You share in that. Well, that's tremendously blissful. That's the greatest bliss imaginable. So the question is, why do we go through this world? Why didn't the Kadosh Baruch Hu just make the world to come, and that's it? And we'd all live in that world in tremendous bliss and satisfaction. So the Ramchal explains, because God in His wisdom understood that one's bliss should be earned. Should be earned. Something which you earn is much more gratifying than something which you've just gotten for nothing or for cheap. Imagine the following. Imagine an Olympic team sport. And, the team plays. And as you know, in any team, there are some people that get more time in the game. There are some people that more or less sit on the bench. So imagine you have the Olympic competition, and everybody in the team plays, and one fellow never gets any time. He sat on the bench throughout the entire tournament. He's a member of the team. The coach did not divide the time evenly. So everyone else got time playing and participating and generating the points led to victory. This one sat on the bench the whole time. But when the awards are given out, when the medals are given out, every member of the team gets a medal. So think of the difference. How does that person feel, right, in comparison to the people who really earn the medal? Well, nice to get a medal, but there's no comparison between a person who gets it for sitting on the bench and a person who gets it for having earned it. So God in His wisdom understood that our eternal bliss should be earned. So therefore we are put into this world and we're given a job. We're given a job. We're given a Torah and our mitzvahs to do and the Torah to learn and character, refinement that we're meant to experience. And we do those good things. We are Zoche. We merit our eternal bliss in the world to come. That's the idea. Is that true for everybody? Does everybody earn his share in the world to come through doing mitzvahs, learning Torah, making good choices? What about people who never come to that? Let's say a child who was born and dies as a child. Never became old enough to learn Torah, do mitzvahs, make choices. Let's say a person is born, severely handicapped. May live many years, but on the other hand, never reaches a level of soundness of mind where he or she can be held responsible for his actions, and therefore can't earn the bliss of the world to come in the conventional sense. So how do you understand the meaning of those lives? The Ramchal addresses related points, and the Ramchal says a very interesting thing. He says not everything that happens to a person, whether in this world or the next world, is totally a function of reward and punishment. Sometimes it's a function of the task you were given in this world. And as we pointed out in the past, sometimes the task that you are given is not based on considerations that are relevant to you, but it's based on considerations that are relevant to others. For example, one of the great challenges that we have is the challenge to be charitable. It's a mitzvah of tzedakah. We have to give charity. Some people are exceptionally charitable. Some people are very miserly. This is a big nisayon. This is a big test. And most of us are tested with this test. HaKadosh blesses us with money, with income. And the question is, what will we do with it? Will we save it all for ourselves? Or will we direct it, at least in part, to good causes? Okay. If there were no poor people in the world, would this challenge exist? The challenge of giving charity? There's no need for charity. Everyone could live perfectly well. Because there are no poor people. In other words, in order for there to be a test of charity, there have to be poor people in the world. So we should assume that there are some poor people in the world. Why? Simply to create the test. But what do they deserve being poor? No. This is the assignment they're given. Now when you think about it for a moment, you realize that much of our lives is really not a function of reward and punishment. Much of our lives really is determined by divine decree, not on the basis of reward and punishment considerations. Where you were born. There are advantages to being born in certain places. Certainly there are advantages to being born in certain times. Being born in the 21st century gives you advantages that a person born in the 16th century didn't have. Like running water. Air conditioning. Right? So why is it that some people were born in the 15th century and some people merited being born in the 21st century? And by the way progress is unfolding, people that are born today have an advantage over those of us who were born 50 years ago. In terms of life expectancy, in terms of conveniences. Now, I like to joke with my kids how so many things they take for granted we didn't have. I tell them the first PC, personal computer, that was marketed after I was married already. That means that when I was a young fella, we didn't waste any time surfing the net. We didn't have it. We had no idea what it was. Maybe, the basketball net, but not the internet. Well, we didn't have these things. Because I tell them that, I'll go on a tangent just to tell you these memories that come into my head. Nowadays everything's in plastic. All foods come in plastic jars and stuff. But I remember I was in Yeshiva when the first plastic soda bottles came out. Soda used to be sold in glass bottles. Now listen to this. Purim is coming up, right? So Purim, yeshiva boys will drink a little bit. It's not a secret. You know that, right? You heard about that? You heard about that. So it was a big problem in yeshiva that the boys were scared. Since everything came in glass bottles, what happens if the bottle that breaks? You drop it on the floor, and it breaks. There's glass all over the place. You want to avoid that, so they wanted plastic bottles. Nowadays, that wouldn't be a problem. Even though liquor does come only in glass bottles still today, but you could always pour it into a plastic bottle and it'll be fine. But in those days, there were no plastic bottles, but there were some things that came in plastic bottles. What came in plastic bottles? Back then? Shampoo for your hair came in plastic bottles because, they believed that the plastic, wasn't appropriate for edibles, but, if you're putting it in your hair, that's okay. So I still remember there were guys in yeshiva, they would take their shampoo bottles, they'd rinse them out real well, and they'd fill them with whiskey, and Purim they would drink whiskey from the shampoo bottle. You see this in your eyes, It's such a trivial example. But the point is that so many things we take for granted nowadays just didn't exist. So why are some people lucky enough to be born in the 20th or 21st centuries, and some people had to suffer, being born in times that were much more primitive? And there are different places. As a person who's born in a temperate climate certainly has an advantage over a person who's born in an extreme climate, whether it's extreme heat, extreme cold. A person who's born into a vibrant Jewish community certainly has an advantage over a person who's born into a community which doesn't provide opportunities for learning and mitzvah observance. So is that based on consideration as a reward and punishment? What did you do before you were born that determines where you should be born and when you should be born? Because obviously there are considerations that are not rooted in reward and punishment. Rather, God assigns each person a set of circumstances. This is your test. This is your test. This is the family you're born into. This is the place you're born. This is the time you're born. These are the talents and potentialities you're given, etc. And every potentiality has a test attached to it. I always say jokingly that if you are 7 feet tall, you'll play in the NBA. They'll teach you how to play basketball. You have what it takes, right? If you are 4 feet tall, you can be a jockey in the Kentucky Derby. If you're kind of in between, you're up the creek. You got to become a rabbi or a doctor or something like that. But you're not going to have those opportunities. And those opportunities, of course, are big nisyonos. To play in the NBA is not a place for a religious Jew. Neither is the Kentucky Derby. It's run on Shabbos all. So God assigns people with their jobs. It seems that some get better, some get worse, but God has His cheshbonos, His calculations, and sometimes the cheshbonos, the calculations, are the exact opposite of what we would think. Imagine you have 2 fellows, and God says that your portion in life is to be wealthy. Your test is to be tested with the trial of wealth. And the other person, his trial is to be tested with the trial of poverty. So if I would ask you, which would you prefer, the trial of wealth or the trial of poverty? You'd probably say, I'll take the trial of wealth, thank you. But when you go to the world to come, you may discover, surprise, 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 that the people that were tested with the test of wealth, virtually all of them failed, and the people who were tested with poverty passed. And then you, boy, I wish I had that test.
Some are tested with both.
Pardon?
Some are tested with both.
Both, different stages. Wealthy people go bankrupt, so they have both.
So the Christians are right, huh?
Pardon?
The Christians. That's what they.
Well, they say that. But I think that there could be exceptions to the rule. Wealthy people can have great zchuyot, great merits. But in any case, so God assigns people their tasks. Most often, I would say that the task or the circumstances in which you're born create the setting for your unique trial, for your unique challenges. But it's conceivable that some people are sent to this world not to be tested, but to create the setting for the test of others, or to create opportunities for others to learn, or through their suffering accomplish something in the world. And this is a very difficult thing to grasp, but think about it deeply. And the answer is that these people will be richly rewarded in the world to come, because they certainly will have done what they were sent to this world to do. Whereas those of us who are sent to this world to learn Torah and do mitzvahs, what type of grade do you think we're going to get when it comes to the final exam after 120 years? Passing in Canada is 50. By the way, it's a good reason to live in Canada, because in the States, passing is 65. So imagine if you go to the next world and they bring you before the heavenly throne of judgment, and they said, well, we've analyzed what we expect of you and what you've done, and we give you a grade of 60. You failed. You say, no, I'm from Canada. In Canada, 60 is passing. You can try it. It might work. I don't know. It might work. But in any case, those of us whose lives are meant to be opportunities for nisayon, for testing, for trial, it may be that we're not going to have a passing grade. It may be that we're going to be a little embarrassed when it comes to the end. Whereas this person who was sent to this world to suffer, he accomplished his purpose. What's the purpose of suffering? Suffering has its purpose. Suffering creates nisyonos for others. It creates challenges for others. It creates lessons for others. God, if you study the Chumash, you study God's scheme for Jewish history, the last great hope for mankind is the Jewish people. When God created the world, his hope was that all mankind would acknowledge him and serve him. Mankind as a whole failed, the generation of the flood, the generation of the Tower of Babel. And God said, listen, my back is up against the wall. The world will only be saved, so to speak, through the actions of a subset of humanity. There will be a small group, Klal Yisrael, which will be selected, and they will bring, through their good deeds, they will bring the entire world to merit, to morality, to truth, to faith, etc. And if Klal Yisrael fails in its mission, the whole world will go down the drain with it. That's essentially, this is it. This is the last chance. And therefore it's very important that Klal Yisrael learn its lessons well. The truths that Klal Yisrael is meant to spread, it must learn very well and very deeply. There are certain things we believe about God. God is omniscient, God is omnipotent, and so on and so forth. How were the Jews meant to be taught this? The Torah says, through the Makkos. But the Makkos are only going to be a demonstration if there is a victim to the Makkos. So is it worthwhile that thousands and thousands of innocent Egyptians suffer just so that the Jews will learn their lessons well? Before we pass judgment, let's ask them. Let's say you were one of those Egyptians. You know, you were a 10-year-old Egyptian who were living a pretty good life. And then all of a sudden came a Makkah, and you experienced a week of agony and you died. Okay, typical scenario, right? Let's say you were an Egyptian, you died in the Makkah of Dever. You know, Dever only afflicted animals. It's probably a bad example. Let's say you died in the Makkah of Specharis. Right? You were a firstborn, died in the plague of the firstborn. So you were a 10-year-old kid, right? You had a happy life, you know, played like all the kids and were carefree. They didn't have schools in those days. And then all of a sudden, one night at midnight, there's a plague and you die. So we say, oh, it's not fair, it's not right. The person's suffering this life. Okay, this kid goes to the next world, and God says, you did your job. You accomplished exactly what you were sent to the world to do, and therefore you are going to now partake of eternal bliss in the world to come in exchange for your sacrifice. What would that child say? Got a good deal? Bad deal? What do you say? A good deal. In fact, if one of us would be going over to heaven at the same time, and you discover that this kid, who had a carefree life for 10 years and was killed in a Makas B'chayres, goes to Olam Haba for his suffering, and you, well, no, you don't go for suffering. You didn't suffer. You lived your whole life through. And your job was to do mitzvahs, and well, what did you do? What did you accomplish? Did you accomplish 100% of expectations? No, maybe I accomplished 50% of expectations. So, I'm sorry. Reading that little kid, he's all the way up there in the world to come. I'm not going to be on his level. That's right. He fulfilled his purpose. You didn't. Would you like to trade places with that kid? Sure. Right. So that kid thinks it's worthwhile. The rest of us would love to trade places with him. So where's the injustice? It's only an injustice because we are accustomed to thinking of this world as being everything. This is the be-all, end-all. This is the bakoil mikol koil. This is the totality of existence. All the accounts have to be settled and make sense here. Why do we assume such an outlandish thing? Did we forget our belief in the world to come? There is a world to come. There is no Olam Haba, right? Do we expect everything has to be has to work out here?
Doesn't that potentially, for want of a better word, excuse many, many terrible things? You say, oh, well, it's because they get rewarded later.
Pardon?
Yeah. It seems to me that it can excuse...
God caused disasters. God caused disasters.
So what we perceive as natural disasters fall into this area.
Natural disasters.
National disasters.
Acts of God. Acts of God.
So what
Earthquakes, volcanoes, the 10 plagues, acts of God.
So what was the Holocaust?
I wouldn't call that an act of God. Right?
No, but the effect was the same as the disaster now.
Well, the effect of getting struck by lightning is the same thing as someone shooting you. That's true. But this is a harm that was inflicted upon you by a human being, and this is something which God did. Right? So that's a very important difference. But we're talking about natural disasters. Because natural disasters, when they strike, we have to assume they're for a purpose. To the extent they're for a purpose, the innocent victims, assuming innocent victims, right, certainly are rewarded for having fulfilled their purpose. And it may be that we're going to be jealous of them because we had a harder job, and we may not have been successful, and they had an easier job, and we're successful. Now, the point I'm making is this. This explanation, I think, is a true explanation. You have to let it sink in a little bit. But it's not the type of explanation that as soon as you hear it, you say, oh, of course, how can it be otherwise? There's a lot of elements here that you have to accept as a matter of faith. For example, the fact that there is a world to come, the fact that God is just, the fact that seeming injustice is unfair, that God is omnipotent, and God would not allow injustices to occur. Those are things which aren't self-evident. And therefore, that's why there are many people who deny them. Many people who reject these proofs. But in other words, if you've come through the process of learning through faith, and now you have a question, how do I understand these things that happen? There are answers. There are answers. Are the answers so compelling that of course, it must be that way, it can't be otherwise? No, they're not that compelling. They call upon us to accept with faith certain propositions, and once we accept those propositions, we are forced to give these types of answers. But ultimately, they fall under the scope of faith. And that's why you have to learn them from people you trust, people you count on, people that would not let you down. This gets back to our original discussion. If you want to be an effective Seder leader, I think it's important to think about the issues of faith. What exactly do I believe? What am I clear about? What am I not clear about? Because if that is what you are meant to transmit, then you only can transmit that which you fully understand and accept. And that's why I think that all too often the Pesach Seder doesn't realize its promise. Because we get bogged down in so many side issues. And maybe that's the Satan working. And as I know, when you have a big Seder, it could take 45 minutes just to get everyone seated. Who wants to sit next to what?
Place cards.
Place
A
cards.
wise man wants to leave place cards.
In other words, I don't want to sit next to him, and next to him, and place, yeah. And then the Manashtana. Look, I'm all for the Manashtana, but if you have 20 children and each one wants to do a solo, that could be an hour right there. And then a lot of the discussions at the Seder, even people who are serious people and want to do it right, very often the discussions revolve on very technical points, maybe textual problems. Why does the Haggadah select this word and not this word, and this grammatical construction and that grammatical construction? They're very interesting. They're very interesting points, but it's not really what the Seder is about. What it's really about is belief, faith, trust in God, and what we learned from that experience. And if we take it seriously, prepare for it, we will be very successful in imparting these values to our children.